Hey everyone, this is Randy with Modern Randy. I am finally back after my long hiatus. Basically had a lot of stuff going on in my life, had a lot of things going on, and now I am finally back and able to produce videos again. Now, obviously, I'm coming back right at the start of a ban here with Violent Outbursts and a lack of banning in Pioneer, but did want to let you guys know a little bit. I am doing a podcast now with another creator called Dakota. His YouTube channel is Crawlday23. I'll link that in the description below so you can check out his videos, check out what we're doing on the podcast. Got a lot of good stuff over there. But anyway, I thought I would talk about the new banning. So obviously, Rhinos has kind of been crushing it here in Modern for the last little bit. Basically, once Fury got banned, it kind of put Rhinos at the forefront because Scam died off. So now Rhinos is just kind of taken over, and then this is just kind of like one of the stereotypical lists that we had for the 5-color Rhinos list when they introduced that ley line of the Guild Pack, and of course Cyan Draco then became great, being able to play that on turn 2 basically free, along with then giving your Rhinos hexproof. If you had 2 Cyans, they both had hexproof, just kind of became a cluster, to say the least. But moving forward, is Rhinos now dead now that we've lost Violent Outburst? Obviously, there are other Cascade spells that are worse than Violent Outburst, because obviously, let's be real, that was the best one. So I do think that obviously Rhinos is not going to die. Obviously, this list dies because there's no Violent Outburst anymore. But, I mean, this is essentially the next step, or the easiest step, is we just slide in 4 Ardent Pleas over the Violent Outburst. And I think obviously 5-color Rhinos is still going to be a deck. I think that's going to still be in the meta. I think it's still going to be relatively prevalent. That being said, I do think that Living End here has died. This deck, I think, is genuinely dead as a whole. Violent Outburst is what really held this deck together, being able to win at the end of your opponent's turn 3. Your opponent's end of your turn, or end of your opponent's turn 3, being able to put in, like 10 power into play, wiping their creatures off the board, just like maybe grooving them again. That's no longer a thing. I think this deck becomes infinitely slower and not as consistent by losing Violent Outburst. Not to mention, it now has to splash white for the Ardent Play, which is way worse than Rhinos, because Rhinos are already being 5-color, or with it being like, the Teamer deck or Rug version, you could already just splash in a white without really trying too hard. This deck doesn't really want white. There's no reason to have white for cycling or anything like that. So I do think that's going to be a lot harder on this deck as a whole. I think that Living End has now dropped down to a tier 2 deck, maybe tier 3 deck, honestly. I think it has hit a bottoming out, and I'm not sure if it's going to come back. That being said, obviously we have some major winners. I think that Yawgmoth obviously has grew a lot now. Now, don't get me wrong, Rhinos is not dead, so it's not like, Yawgmoth just lost its worst matchup. But I think a lot of people are going to be off the Rhinos train now that it's been hit, and it is a weaker of a deck. That being said, Yawgmoth should be the one to step up and take up that percentage of the meta that we just lost for Rhinos, because, let's be real, Yawgmoth was essentially the second best deck in the format, only held down because Rhinos was so good. I do think we're going to see a lot more Yawgmoth. I'm sure the sideboard is going to change overall for all these decks now, because Rhinos is going to be less in the meta. I think it's still going to be prevalent. I still think it's going to be a top 5 deck as a whole. But I do think it's going to be on the lower end of the top 5. It's not going to be that 20-30% like we used to have. So definitely Yawgmoth has gotten better. Probably is now number 1 or number 2. And if it's not number 1, Titan is definitely the number 1 deck in the format now. Moving forward. Basically, it lost nothing besides Rhinos getting weaker, which is only good for that. Only good for Titan. This is a deck, in my opinion, that should have been hit years ago. They got Summer Bloom banned out of them, and then this deck has essentially never taken a hit since then. Like, I know you can argue that Once Upon a Time was banned and that got hit out of this deck, but like, let's be real, it was a free mana spell that was going to get hit no matter what. So I don't really count that as being hit on this deck, but I do think that Titan has now become probably the number 1 or number 2 best deck in the format without a question. And moving forward is going to be just probably one of the best decks. If you don't know how to play this deck yet, or you don't haven't picked it up yet, I would say now is the time because I don't think anything's ever going to get anything banned out of this deck. We've seen years upon years of it just being amazingly good, well positioned, fighting through hate all the time. Only seems to get to pick up more and more good spells, and kind of never loses anything. So I do think this is a good deck to still pick up, still learn. Get your gold fishing on. That's my kind of 90% of what this deck does already is goldfish, and basically just you can play this deck without ever playing against an opponent by just assuming that they're going to have insert this amount of hate against you in games 1, 2, and 3, and then figuring out how you would beat those hate pieces. But that said, I still think this deck is amazing. I think it is at least the number 2 deck in the format, if not number 1. And that's pretty much all I have about Modern so far. That being said, I have really expanded and gone, like I play a bunch of Pioneer now. We have the RCQ, Pioneer RCQ season coming up. So obviously there was no bans in Pioneer, which I think was a mistake personally. That's just my opinion. But so with no bans, I think that we're still going to see pretty much the same decks are going to be doing well. Obviously Amalia is still a good percentage of the meta. We saw it being played a lot at the Pro Tour. Still obviously a good deck moving forward. I am curious to see what's going to happen. It's still, I think Amalia is still a problem in the format as a whole. I think it keeps down aggressive decks as a whole. I think it kind of stifles aggressive decks, which I know someone's going to comment, well, actually, Boros Heroic is doing amazing against it. Yes, congratulations. There's one aggro deck that does well against it, while every other aggro deck kind of just folds to it because they gain 80 life. Doesn't really make it good, and I think it hampers the format as a whole. Obviously, we still have essentially what is the best deck in the format. Moving forward, Arclight Phoenix, I really think that this was the time that they should have banned Treasure Cruise and did some other things. If you want to hear more about my thoughts on what they should have banned, what they should have done with that, check out my podcast with All Day 23. Like I said, we went over all the what we thought would get banned, what we thought might get unbanned, and all that fun jazz. But I do think this was a perfect time to hit Treasure Cruise and really shake up the meta before we go into the RCQ season, because our next banning isn't going to be until middle of the RCQ season. And like we all saw for Orlando, we don't want bannings here at the last minute type thing. Get them quick, get them done, get them quick and over with. That's the better way to do it. Wizards knows this, but they think that Pioneer is in a good state, I suppose. So I disagree, but we'll leave it as that. Lotus Field, I think, is going to see more and more popularity popping up. People are realizing it's a good card. It's a good deck. The Archdruid's Charm has kind of made this deck even more consistent than what it was. Not to mention, it's just, I don't know, this deck always seems like it keeps getting better and better, and WotC says that they don't want to have combo decks in Pioneer, but somehow Lotus Field has survived multiple bannings and continues to just get played. So we'll see if it actually will stay that way, or if they'll maybe finally do something about this deck. I don't think they will. Not based on what we've seen from Wizards so far. This seems to be the deck that is allowed to be a combo deck in Pioneer. And of course we have the newest hotness, that Rakdos Vampires list that everybody at the PT was talking about, everyone was talking about after the PT. I mean, essentially, it is just Rakdos mid-range with a better plan, right? Because we have Sorin into Vein Ripper, which is just good against the control matchup, because now when they board wipe you, they're losing a bunch of life because Vein Ripper sees everything die. Same thing with against the Lotus Field, it puts on a clock. Same thing against Arclight Phoenix, it puts on a clock against Phoenix as well. Yes, they can, kill Vein Ripper with their axe, throwing, pitching a card, they can sacrifice a Phoenix, get it back the same turn type deal. But it puts on a fast clock, it does a lot of pressure, it does everything that Rakdos has been doing for the last year and a half, 2 years now. Basically just playing some of the best cards that also happen to be vampires. And Sorin plus Vein Ripper is just a good little combo of cheating out a 6/6 on turn 3, or a 6/5, sorry, on turn 3. So I do think Pioneer is in an interesting kind of state. I think that control decks are somewhat slowly on their way out. I think that They're good against the aggro decks that are still being pushed down though by Amalia. They're good against the Amalia combo deck, but then like Rakdos is still a hard matchup for Control to deal with. Plus, they now have the problem child of Vein Ripper, where like Control doesn't have the ability to sacrifice a creature. They're not playing creatures, right? So like that's going to be interesting to see how we see Control either evolve or develop over the course of this RCQ season, seeing if maybe it can figure out what to do against this deck. Phoenix still has, I think, a decent matchup against this deck. Yes, Vein Ripper is, a pain to deal with and stuff like that, but Phoenix can still put on a fast clock and still do kind of broken things, right? Like it's still turning through his deck, it's still drawing a bunch of cards. And then Amalia is interesting because I think Amalia should have a decent matchup overall against the Rakdos deck, but obviously the PT says otherwise. So we'll have to see how Amalia kind of adjusts to this metagame. But I think Amalia is good against Arclight Phoenix, terrible against Control, and I think it's probably 50-50 or 60-40 against Rakdos. And then Lotus Field, I have to imagine Amalia is just not good against. Basically just because of Lotus Field's you're gonna do your thing and gain 80 life, and they're just not gonna care and kill you still in the turn before you do it. So, but this is basically just me coming back, kind of going over the ban list and such. I think that there should have been a couple different bans in Pioneer. I think Amalia needed to get hit and kind of taken out of the format. I think this was a good time to hit Fable and really shake out the format, kind of make it possible to where you can play a black-green deck. Because right now there's no reason to play green, essentially, or I'm sorry, there's no reason to play like a black-green mid-range deck when you can just play Fable. Like Fable is just the better option. Because like even if we look at the Rakdos, like this Rakdos Vamps, they are playing red literally for Blood Tide Harbinger because it's a good 2-mana creature that's also a vampire, and Fable. Then everything else is black. Even the sideboard's all black cards. So like red's not that powerful except for the fact that it has Fable. And I think Fable has kind of homogenized this whole format, and where if you want to play mid-range, you want to play anything a little slower, you have to play red because Fable is just the best 3-drop you can be playing. But like I said, guys, this is just me coming back. I'm going to be putting out videos on the regular again. I'm going to actually be doing things. And if you want to check out my podcast, go over to Crawdaddy23 on YouTube. You can watch the podcast. We have a couple different episodes out already. Those come out on Saturday as well. But I'm back. I'm going to be doing more videos, and don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, all that fun jazz. That way you can keep up with the videos that are coming out.